Any questions for me?
Like, how big is the baby?
It's full term.
What? 9 months?
Something was crying.
Let's see. Have you watched the news of the girls that what they do to their babies and what they go to jail?
Something was crying.
So as of right now, like I said, is we're gonna have the detectives come over here and they're gonna talk to you. Okay? We have to gather some more information about what's going on. They'll get your statement. They're gonna get the doctor's statements. They're gonna get everybody's statements. Okay? I don't know everything yet. Okay? So I'm not gonna tell you. I can't tell you nothing honestly. Okay? All I can say is
Gonna go to jail.
right now. No. Well,
Where did you put the baby at? Tell me the truth. You put it in the bag?
yes.
Yeah. In what bag?
In the trash bag.
Why didn't you say anything to us? Do you want to get in trouble for this now? You could get in trouble for this, baby.
Cannibal facts that'll eat at you for days. If you thought Jeffrey Dahmer was picky for not eating people with tattoos, Venezuelan serial killer Dorangel Vargas, who ate 10 people, didn't like his victims to be overweight because he thought that they contained too much cholesterol. On Thanksgiving Day 1991, 23-year-old Omaima Nelson stabbed her sugar daddy William before carving him up and cooking his head in a deep fryer and eating him for dinner. In the 1970s, Jorge Negromonte, also known as the Brazilian Sweeney Todd, would bake his victims into pies before selling them to local townsfolk. After murdering and eating his classmate in 1981, Issei Sagawa was released from prison because of a loophole in Japanese law. 71-year-old Tamara Samsonova murdered and ate at least 11 people and kept a diary detailing her crimes. She's been dubbed the Granny Ripper, and this CCTV footage shows her carrying the head of one of her victims in a saucepan.
This man left his teenage girlfriend to die in a park after shooting her days before her graduation. Giovanni Herrin was 19 years old and was dating 18-year-old Kareem Barreto Sabalza. A few weeks prior to the fateful incident, she'd actually sent texts to her friends stating that she was afraid of her boyfriend and fearing for her life. On June the 16th, 2018, in a plot to steal her car and money to buy substances, he lured her to a local park in Washington. There, he callously strangled her and shot her in the head. Horrifically, she was actually still alive and suffering when he fled the area, and she was found by a passerby. She passed away from her injuries and was just days away from graduating. She was expected to begin a nursing scholarship. Giovanni was arrested but ended up claiming that he felt sick on July the 4th. He was taken to hospital and used this as an opportunity to escape. He got in a taxi and injured the taxi driver, but luckily police hunted him down, shot him, and then brought him back to hospital. He's recently been sentenced to 37 years in prison.
This bank worker murdered her customers after stealing money from their family. On July 2018, 52-year-old Cynthia and her son, 22-year-old Sean, were found murdered in their apartment in Florida. The investigation quickly pointed at 25-year-old Amelia Bissoon, who worked at Chase Bank in downtown Orlando. Cynthia's 65-year-old father, who suffered from dementia, was a regular at Chase Bank, and he usually dealt with Amelia. Amelia was the one who helped the man with his banking needs. And on March of that year, Amelia wrote a $50,000 check from the elderly man's account, which was supposed to go to his grandson's account, Sean. But instead, Amelia and her husband, 28-year-old Joshua, took this money and put it in their account. A few months later, Cynthia went to the bank with her son Sean and asked why these checks were not deposited into his account after her father said that the funds should be there. Before the family could investigate, Joshua went to Cynthia's home and took her life and her son's life. At first, they denied having anything to do with the murders, but after some time, Amelia turned on her husband and he was sentenced to life in prison. On the other hand, Amelia was only charged with theft and she got 3 years in jail.
My body was half amputated after being run over by a forklift during my shift at work. My name is Lauren Showers. When the incident occurred, I was just 19 and working at a height of 10 meters. I fell, and as fate would have it, a forklift ran over and crushed the lower half of my body. The pain was excruciating and everything transpired rapidly. I was immediately taken to the hospital. There I was faced with two tough choices. One was an attempt to reconstruct the lower half of my body, but it came with a high risk. The other was amputation, which had a higher survival rate. In that dire situation, I expressed my will to live, even if only my head remained. The doctors proceeded with the amputation, and I also lost a portion of one arm. The accident left me reliant on bags for bodily functions. But I remained resilient. My spirit was unbroken, and I was determined to find joy in life. I often remark that being alive is what truly counts, and everything else is about adjusting. I underwent extensive physiotherapy to regain some autonomy. Mastering the art of using a wheelchair was tough, but I was up for the challenge. As life progressed, I found love and am now engaged. We're often questioned about our future together, but our love is the constant. My life might have taken an unexpected turn, but our love remains pure and profound. This is my tale of resilience, adaptability, and realizing life's true essence. What's your take on it? Please share your thoughts and support.
The dad from Seventh Heaven is a pedophile. This is Stephen Collins, and you might recognize him from the television show Seventh Heaven. Stephen was born in 1947 in Des Moines, Iowa, and he has had a long career in Hollywood. He was in the Star Trek movie, Charlie's Angels, and yes, Seventh Heaven. For years, Stephen was regarded as a solid actor and a stand-up guy in Hollywood. But in 2014, all of that would change. So in October of 2014, an audio tape was leaked to the media. And this voice sounded a lot like Stephen Collins' voice. And in this leaked audio tape, the man that is allegedly Stephen Collins describes in graphic detail his past abuse of minors. He even states directly in the audio tape that the girl was under the age of 14. After this tape was released, the New York City Police Department began looking into these allegations. And after that, the Los Angeles Police Department came forward and said that they had already investigated him in 2012, a few years earlier. An investigation which stemmed from a claim that was made 18 years ago about him doing the same thing. Then, a month or so later, in December of 2014, he admitted in an interview with People magazine that he had had 3 inappropriate relationships with minors in the years 1973, 1982, and 1994. So nothing really came out of all of this. There was no arrest, there was no conviction for Stephen Collins. And yet he actually went on the record in an interview with a formal publication stating that in the past he had abused 3 different minors. And to me, this shows a pattern of behavior. He abused these minors decades apart. This shows that it wasn't just a one-off mistake. This guy is a predator. And so yeah, I don't know where he's at now, what he's doing, I don't really care, but I do think that the Justice Department should have had a deeper look at these allegations.
The murder victim remained unidentified for decades until a breakthrough in the case revealed a potential serial killer. In July 1974, on a Provincetown, Massachusetts beach, mutilated human remains were found. The victim had no clothes and was lying on a beach blanket at Race Point Beach. Terrifyingly, her hands were missing and her skull had been crushed. For years, the woman remained unidentified. Presumably, the removal of her hands may have been to make identifying the victim a lot harder. For years, she's only been known as the Lady of the Dunes. Then, in October 2022, a breakthrough. Authorities revealed that they had finally identified the unknown woman. We now know she was Ruth Terry of Tennessee. She was just 37 when she was murdered. Recently, another announcement was made. Her husband, Guy Moldavin, was named as her killer. The pair had got married the same year she was killed. They'd actually been on their honeymoon that year and Guy had returned home alone. He told her family that they'd had a fight and she'd left. He claimed he just never heard from her again. Now, Guy actually died in 2000, aged 78, after a long illness. However, we've since learned some fascinating details. Police later learned that he was also wanted in connection with the disappearance of one of his several wives. This was Manzanita Means and her 18-year-old daughter Dolores. This dated back to 1960, 14 years prior to Ruth's murder. Shockingly, their mutilated bodies were also discovered. They had been found in a septic tank at their home, and although he was charged with unlawful flight after fleeing, he was never charged with their murders. He was later also wanted by Seattle police for fraud after obtaining $10,000 from another wife's stepmom.
This case is horrific and really interesting all at the same time when you do some digging. So there's a big conspiracy theory around this case, and I'll explain more about that at the end. This is Antron Singleton, aka Big Lurch, and he is a rapper turned murderer and cannibal. Antron gained his nickname Big Lurch due to his height. He was 6'5" tall. He had quite a successful rap career, and he'd often rap about serial killers such as Jeffrey Dahmer. His rap career was actually taking off, but in the year 2000 he got into a car wreck and he broke his neck. He was discharged and sent home with painkillers, but they weren't enough, and he quickly turned to street drug PCP to relieve his pain. He would take this drug regularly and for weeks on end, and it would cause something called excited delirium, and Antron started having hallucinations. Antron lived with his friend and his friend's girlfriend, Tanisha Ysays, in Los Angeles, California. On the night of April 10th, 2002, Tanisha was found dead in her apartment by a friend. Her chest had been ripped open and she had a 3-inch blade wedged in her shoulder blade. She had teeth marks on her face and her lungs had been ripped out. Antron was actually found standing out in the street covered in blood and looking up to the sky, barking like a dog. Allegedly, he was also holding one of Tanisha's lungs in his hands. The lung apparently also had bite marks in it, and human flesh was found in Antron's digestive tract. He was, of course, arrested. Now, there is a conspiracy theory. I've looked into it, and a lot of people don't believe that Antron murdered Tanisha. They think that he was framed. The police claimed that when they picked Antron up, he was absolutely covered in blood, but his booking photos prove otherwise. People are also doubting how they managed to retrieve human flesh from his digestive tract without performing surgery. And apparently the bite marks on Tanisha's face weren't that of a human, they were dog bites. Antron claims that Tanisha's boyfriend got them both high on PCP and he was the one that committed the murder while they were both passed out. Even Tanisha's own mother doesn't believe that it was Antron. She said that Tanisha's boyfriend was abusive and the day before she died, she'd packed her bags and threatened to leave. She believes that Antron was set up, but she wasn't allowed to testify in court. And in November 2003, he was found guilty of Tanisha's murder and sentenced to life without the possibility of parole. He's currently incarcerated at Salinas Valley State Prison in Monterey County.
This woman claimed to be a 9/11 survivor, but she wasn't even in America on the day of the attacks. This is Alicia Esteve Head, aka Tanya Head. So a few years after the attacks, Alicia, aka Tanya, started claiming that she survived the attacks and she was in the South Tower at the time that the plane hit the building. Even further, she claimed to have been on the 78th floor of the building above the plane's impact. She claimed that her fiancé, aka her husband as she claimed later on, Dave, was killed during the attack, and that she had to crawl through the flames and smoke of the tower and she escaped. This would have made her one of only 19 people who survived at or above the point of impact that day, which means statistically that her survival would have been a miracle. So I'm going to call her Tanya from now on because that's what she was going with when she was doing all this. But in the years after the attacks, Tanya started up an online support group for 9/11 survivors. She wasn't paid for her involvement in this group, but she became the most prominent member of the group, and that's why she came to America in 2003. But let me remind you, Tanya had actually never been in America before the year 2003. She was living in Spain while all of this happened. So when she arrived in New York City, she was met with fanfare. People were excited to hear her story from her mouth. She was introduced to the then mayor of the city, Michael Bloomberg, pictured here. And she was even photographed with Rudy Giuliani, who was the mayor of New York at the time of the attacks. So Tanya had these severe burns on her arm that she claims she sustained during the attacks. So after she visited America, Tanya was interviewed by various news outlets. She was in the newspapers, she was on TV, and she was even invited to guide people around the wreckage of the World Trade Center, where she told people she was a survivor. But in 2007, the New York Times tried to verify Tanya's story, and what they discovered was shocking. She claimed that she had graduated from Harvard University and Stanford, but neither university had a record of her being there. She also claimed that at the time of the attack, she was working at Merrill Lynch in the South Tower, even though Merrill Lynch didn't have offices there. Shortly afterwards, a newspaper from Barcelona confirmed that she had actually been in class in Barcelona at the time of the attacks, and that she had told her friends and family members that she had actually sustained those burn marks on her arms from a bad automobile accident. So, shortly after her fraud was exposed, Alicia moved back to Barcelona, Spain. I mean, you gotta think about this. She was at the time the president of the World Trade Center Survivors Network. This was a huge, influential organization. And she had lied her way to the top of that organization, and no one really knows why she did it. Nowadays, she lives a normal, quiet life in Spain, but yeah, this is just a crazy story.
This is 30-year-old Nestor Hernandez, and he's currently facing the death penalty for double murder. I'm about to play some footage of the day that that double murder took place, and the sound is absolutely horrific. It's his girlfriend basically begging the police not to shoot him after he's just murdered 2 people. What makes it even more shocking is that it's in the labour and delivery suite at the hospital where she gave birth, and their newborn son is also in the same room.
Over here, please, come out. Come outside. Okay, I'm Robert. What's your name, partner? What's your name? Talk to me. All I'm asking. Let them outside, please. Please. Let them out of the room.
This wasn't Nesta's first encounter with the law. In May 2011, he was actually sentenced to 150 days in jail for stealing a car. In December that same year, he robbed a man at gunpoint outside a convenience store and was found in possession of a gun and heroin. For those charges, he entered a plea deal in which he received 2 years in exchange for a guilty plea. In 2014, after his prison sentence, he began dating Selena, and they were a dangerous match made in heaven. They were both involved in substance abuse and on a clear path to destruction. In 2015, they both attacked a woman in North Dallas while she was unlocking her front door. They hit her, knocked her to the ground, and then tied her up in the bathroom before fleeing with her car and $3,000. They were arrested the same day and given 8 years and 5 years in jail for aggravated assault. Nesta only served 6 of those 8 years, and he was released on parole with an ankle monitor. He was supposed to report his movements to his parole officer, but he actually ended up cutting off his ankle monitor and going into hiding. It took a few months, but in April 2021, the police found Nesta and he was sentenced to just 4 months in jail. He was then released in October, again with an ankle monitor. Selena soon became pregnant with Nesta's baby, and it seems absolutely insane to me that he was released with just an ankle monitor, despite his criminal, violent past, with little support, rehabilitation, or monitoring. On October 21st, 2022, Selena gave birth at the Methodist Dallas Medical Center in Texas, and the day after, just after 10 a.m, Nesta came to visit. He'd been drinking most of the morning, and as you can see from this footage, he actually walked into the hospital holding a beer. And it's insane to me that he wasn't stopped at this point and searched, considering the fact that he was also on parole with an ankle monitor. Nesta had actually managed to convince himself that Selena was cheating on him, and he came to the hospital looking for this non-existent man. When he couldn't find him, he went to Selena's room. He was armed with a gun, and despite their newborn son being in the same room, he took out his gun and began to hit Selena over the head with it repeatedly. Healthcare workers Katie and Jeanette heard the commotion and came to see what was going on. When they entered the room, Nesta shot them both, killing them. Nesta then reloaded his gun, and it's assumed that he was going to come out into the hallway and continue shooting. But when he came out, police shot him in the leg and he retreated back into the room. That's when the standoff with police began, and Nesta eventually did give up the gun and he was able to be detained. CPS have taken Selena and Nesta's baby into care. She is allowed to see him every day, but she is not allowed custody. And Nesta has been charged with capital murder. It carries a minimum sentence of life in prison and a maximum sentence of the death penalty.
So this girl was on my Fipe, and she had a lot of likes. So I checked the comments to see why.
14-year-old Claire Miller was arrested early Monday morning for stabbing her older sister, who was wheelchair-bound and has cerebral palsy. After murdering her sister, she called 911 hysterically, explaining what she did. When police arrived, they found Claire outside covered in blood as she was washing the blood off of her hands in the snow. Claire did cooperate with police and told them where her sister was. She was found in her room in a pool of blood with a pillow on top of her, and when they removed the pillow, there was a knife stuck in her neck above her chest. I'm assuming her sister fought back, as the affidavit said that the sister was found with her hands above her head. She obviously passed away with multiple stab wounds, and there's also no motive as to why her sister killed her. And her page is still up.
Hi, I'm Cam, and this group of friends thought they were opening a suitcase full of cash, but it ended up being anyone's worst nightmare. August 19th, 2020, a group of teens went randonauting on a West Seattle beach. They stumbled upon a black suitcase. Immediately, they smelled the most putrid odor. They opened the suitcase and saw that something was wrapped in a black garbage bag. They decided to call the police. What the teens found turned out to be the bodies of 35-year-old Jessica Lewis and 27-year-old Austin Wenner. Autopsies revealed that Jessica had been shot multiple times, and Austin had suffered a single gunshot to the torso. They had both been beaten and dismembered to fit in the suitcases. The couple, who had been together for 8 years, had been killed 2 months prior to their discovery. The killer, 62-year-old Michael Lee Doodley, their landlord. On June 9th, Michael let another woman move into Jessica and Austin's apartment. When she entered, there was heaps of clothing everywhere. Under a pile, she saw the figure of a person and a bloody hand sticking out. She made a joke out of fear and Michael laughed. Michael told authorities that the victims hadn't paid $1,500 for rent. He also has a restraining order from his own daughter because he sexually assaulted her.
What? Nothing there, mate. Nothing there. What? There's nothing there.
Talk about the true story behind Candy on Hulu and Love and Death on HBO Max and how Betty Gore was axed 41 times. Betty Gore was born on January 9th, 1950, and while she was attending college, she met a teaching assistant named Alan Gore through one of her classes. Two of them immediately hit it off, they began dating, and in 1970, Alan and Betty decided to get married. Soon after their wedding, they had their first daughter named Alyssa, and after this, they decided to move to the small town of Wiley, Texas to start a new life. At first, their marriage seemed to be great. They were very in love with each other, and they were excited to grow their family. However, according to reports, Betty did struggle with anxiety and occasional depression. Alan would often have to travel for work, so this meant that Betty was home alone with Alyssa, and this would just cause her a lot of anxiety. She would constantly be calling his office to check in on him. She would call the hotel he was staying at just to talk to him. The traveling was causing a lot of issues in their relationship, and since they had just moved to a new town, Betty didn't really have a lot of friends. She wanted to be more active in the community, so she decided to join her local church, and that's when she began making friends. She started to become friends with a woman named Candace Montgomery, also known as Candy. Both sang in the choir, and the reason they started to become closer is because Betty's daughter, Alyssa, started to grow closer to Candy's daughter. Now, a little bit about Candy. She was married to a man named Pat Montgomery, and the two of them lived a very comfortable life in Wiley, Texas. Her husband had a very good job, so she was able to stay home and take care of their 2 kids. And she had a very nice house. They actually called her house the party house because that's where everyone would get together to hang out. She was friends with everyone in the community. I mean, she was kind of like your typical PTA mom. Even though Betty had joined the church and had started making new friends, things between her and Alan were still not good. She even confided in her friend Candy and told her that her and Alan did not have sex. She just didn't know what else to do or how to get the sparks going again. However, Betty ended up getting pregnant with a second daughter, and she thought that this would change things between her and Alan. And it somewhat did. He was excited about their second daughter. Candy was excited about this as well. She even threw Betty a baby shower at her own house. Alan even told Betty that they were going to take a trip to Europe, just the two of them without children, so that they could reconnect and just be with each other. So it seemed like things were going well. On Friday, June 13th, 1990, Alan was away on a business trip in Minnesota, and Betty was at home taking care of their newborn daughter and getting everything ready for their trip to Europe. Their oldest daughter, Alyssa, actually spent the night at Candy's house, and she was supposed to come back later that day because she had swim practice. However, Alyssa and Candy's daughter really wanted to have another sleepover, so Candy called Betty and asked her if it was okay if Alyssa spent another night there. Betty told Candy that Alyssa had swim practice, and that's when Candy offered to go to Betty's house, pick up the swimsuit, and take Alyssa to practice. So Betty agreed to this plan. Later that morning, Candy stopped by Betty's house to pick up the bathing suit, and then she left. As the day continued to progress, Alan called the house just to check in on Betty, but he wasn't able to get in contact with her. He called one of the neighbors to go check on Betty, and that's when they discovered that Betty was dead. Okay, more in part 2. This is what happened to 4-year-old Luz Gonzalez and how she was killed while her mom tied her shoes. The family is originally from Mexico, but at the time, Luz lived in Brooklyn, New York with her mother, Reina. And she was just honestly the cutest little 4-year-old girl. She was just absolutely adorable and just so nice and kind to everyone. On Sunday, June 24th, 2018, Luz and her mother were walking outside of this laundromat called the Clean City Laundromat in New York. They were walking along the sidewalk, but as you can see, this whole parking lot is just a mess. There is no division between the parking lot and the sidewalk, so if someone reverses from the laundromat, they literally have to drive over the sidewalk. It was just not a safe sidewalk, and Luz was riding her scooter up and down the sidewalk, having fun with her mother following closely behind. Now, as she's riding her scooter, her shoe actually falls off, so Luz gets off the scooter and she goes over to pick up her shoe. Luz tried to put the shoe on herself, but she was 4 years old at this time, so she was struggling to do so, and that's when her mother, Reina, decided to bend down and help her daughter. So Reina bent down to tie her daughter's shoe, and as you can see, they're still on the sidewalk. They're not in the parking lot, they're not in the middle of the road, like they're literally on the sidewalk, which is meant for pedestrians. But again, this parking lot and this sidewalk were built incorrectly, so in order for someone to back out or get inside the laundromat, they literally have to drive over the sidewalk. So as you can see, Luz and her mother are crouched down on the ground trying to put on her shoe when all of a sudden 38-year-old Jeanette Maria, who is driving this black SUV, starts to back out of the parking lot. Again, Luz and her mother are low on the ground. It's not like Reina is standing up and is super obvious, but at the same time, when you're backing out, you should always be aware of your surroundings. So Jeanette backs out of the parking lot, and as you can see, Luz and her mother were right in front of her. As she gets ready to peel out of the parking lot, she runs over 4-year-old Luz and her mother, Reina. After she ran them over, Jeanette stopped because she obviously realized that she had hit something. So she stopped the car, she took a little bit of a pause, and then she just continued driving. She just drove off and she left Luz and Reina alone on the sidewalk. She didn't call the police, she didn't get out of her car to check, what she had hit, nothing. Which is just crazy because her car literally shook after running over 2 people. She obviously was aware that she had hit something, but she didn't care enough to get out and look at what had happened. Now people saw all of this go down, so they immediately ran over to Luz and her mother and tried to call for help. There's actually video footage of Reina just sitting on the ground hugging her daughter, and she just looks like she's in shock. Reina had a really bad injury to her leg, but the injuries to her daughter Luz were much more severe. Police were informed about what had happened, and they actually pulled over the driver, Jeanette Maria, about 4 blocks away from the laundromat. Police informed her that she had just ran over a 4-year-old girl and her mother, and Jeanette was in complete shock. She said she had no idea how this had happened and that she had no idea she had hit someone. She denies everything, and then the police just let her go. Okay, I'm running out of time. More in part 2. On what happened to 14-year-old Alicia Navarro and how she left this note saying she would return but hasn't come back yet. Jessica finds this note in Alicia's bedroom, and she says that it seems like her daughter wrote this in a hurry. Normally Alicia had very pretty handwriting, but this handwriting looked a little bit messy. So after finding the note and finding the 2 chairs leaned against a brick wall, Jessica assumed that her daughter had snuck out of the house and had used the chairs to climb over the wall. Normally this gate was unlocked, but she figures that maybe Alicia thought that the gate would make too much noise, and that's why she decided to just climb over the wall. As soon as she realized that her daughter Alicia was missing, she called the Glendale Police Department and reported her daughter as missing. Police immediately arrived to the scene and they started going through Alicia's bedroom to see if they could find any type of evidence. They discovered that Alicia had taken her laptop, her comic books, her cell phone, and body sprays. Along with that, she had also taken a small backpack adorned with metallic cat ears. What they thought was odd is that Alicia didn't take any of her cell phone or laptop chargers. So it honestly seemed like she did plan on returning home since she didn't take any of her chargers with her or any of her clothes. They tried to track her cell phone to see if they could figure out where it would last ping, but her cell phone had been turned off since the morning she disappeared. She also didn't take any of her medication with her, and Jessica says that she needs this medication. So all of these things combined together again made police and the family believe that Alicia truly wanted to return. They started looking at the evidence found outside of the house, and they saw that there were some footprints leading from the backyard to the front yard. Well, they checked those footprints and they confirmed that those were Alicia Navarro's footprints. They also checked the neighbor surveillance cameras, but they did not capture Alicia leaving. The FBI joined the case about 2 weeks later, and they went through all of Alicia's internet history, her gaming history, everything, to see if that could help with the investigation. They discovered that 11 days before her disappearance, she had messaged a 20-year-old man named Clark through Discord. In these messages, Alicia told Clark that she had sold her Xbox, which she really loved because she loved to game, and that she had a boyfriend. But she didn't give any specific details about who this boyfriend was. Police looked into Clark, they looked through all of his history, and they ended up clearing him. He says that him and Alicia were part of the same online gaming group, and he also found it odd that Alicia would run away from home. Because again, she was very shy and timid. Jessica and the rest of the family started to believe that Alicia had been lured by an online predator. The reason for that is because, again, Alicia spent the majority of her time online. There was one incident that Jessica had caught Alicia giving personal information to a man online. As soon as she saw that happen, she sat Alicia down and told her about the dangers of speaking to strangers and that she shouldn't share these details with anyone. And there was another incident where Jessica actually filed a police report with the Arizona Police Department because Alicia was speaking to a man online that was much older than her. This man was asking Alicia questions such as, "Do you have any stuffed animals?" He also said, "Well, if you don't have any stuffed animals, I can be your stuffed animal." It was just a very inappropriate conversation, so she reported it to the police, but they didn't really do much about it. And one day Jessica noticed that there was a hole about the size of a golf ball in Alicia's window. Okay, more in part 3.